Got it.
Yes. Okay. All right. Well, today is going to be our first day in a series of talking about oneness and being able to do the journey on oneness. And we all have our own journey. And really, the big question is, what does oneness mean? Like, I'm not even sure some people out there even know what that means. So, this is a dear friend. Her name is Molly Knott. And I'll give a quick bio on her and give you a little bit of where she is been. And we will jump right into this. First of all, I want to welcome you, Molly.
Thank you, Vicki. This is so lovely. I feel like we should be sitting on tack trunks in the barn aisle having where all the best conversations happen, but this is the next best thing. So
Yes, yes. And we've had plenty of on the Tack Box talks. Maybe that's really the name of this series, Tack
might
Box
be.
Talk. All right, so here we go. Molly Knott specializes in helping people living with chronic pain reconnect with ease and well-being using mindful and gentle yoga. I mean, just love that. A former university research and professional horse trainer, life as she knew it was derailed in her mid-30s by chronic pain, severe incurable chronic conditions, and premature menopause. Her life began to blossom again after discovering mindful yoga, and she has devoted herself to the rewarding experience of sharing these practices with others. Molly holds an MA in education from Stanford University, a registered yoga teacher, and a certified mindfulness instructor. As Molly no longer rides her horse, it has been the foundation of her devotional practice for the last 37 years and her passion about what horses can teach us with the ride called life. Molly resides in the Sierra Nevada mountains in Northern California with her two beautiful dogs and husband, who I adore, inspired by the awe and wonder of nature on a daily basis. And you must be getting some of that now with all the snow that has been going in this wonderful February weather that we're having.
Yeah, all of us that live here in Lake Tahoe thought that after last winter, we might not ever look forward to snow again, but it has been nice to get a storm this weekend and fill in the mountains a little bit. Yeah.
Yes, yes, and we've gotten plenty of it. But we have to remember that the seasons are really always there and life is always changing. So how we keep moving through that change is really the ride of life.
Of life. Yep. Mhm.
So I have some questions for you, and I don't know where these questions will go. We may get through all of them or not, but let's go ahead and dive into them. So, the first thing is, why don't you tell us what it is that you are doing now, and how did you get into this line of work?
Yeah, thanks, Vicki. I also just really appreciate how much you've supported this work that I've transitioned to over the last 6 or so years. I am a meditation and yoga teacher, and I really work with all different types of people, but with a special focus on people who are living with chronic health conditions or chronic pain, also sometimes just chronic stress, chronic anxiety. In our Western culture, we think of yoga as exercise, as movements. And while that's a piece of yoga, it's really not the whole picture. So when I'm working with folks, there's 5 modalities that we're using. So we use breath exercises and meditation and some movement, and then also what is called self-study in the yogic tradition and community. So yoga also recognizes community as a practice, the kind of exchange we can have with one another. So through using those 5 different modalities, I help people to support their nervous systems, to manage stress. And then also we start to really work specifically with how to relate to difficult sensations in the body, sometimes challenging emotions that we experience, and also the experience of our thoughts, which can range from quite pleasant to quite distressing sometimes. So that's kind of the container that I work with folks.
Yeah, and that's a lot. I mean, especially nowadays with everything that's going on. I mean, our nervous system is on alert all the time, and it's hard to manage. So that is really a great place for people to learn how to organize and become a better person with the type of yoga practice that you're talking about. I was
Yeah.
really unfamiliar with your type of yoga. In fact, I was kind of unfamiliar with yoga in general. I've always looked at it as, oh no, I am not going to sit there for hours and hours and hours and meditate. And it's not for me. I can't even sit still for 5 minutes. How am I going to meditate? But I did one of your courses, and it really did open up my eyes to say, oh, there are so many different levels within yoga and in with meditation. So I'm very excited that you are having this offered for people, because I think it's so important. And
Yeah.
especially in the horse world, right?
Mhm.
We're working with a live animal and they have a nervous system.
Mhm.
They're immediately into flight or fright.
Yeah.
And so how do we learn how to manage that in ourselves?
Mhm.
If we can't, then the horses are just going to feed on that all the time. So I think this is a great segue for people that are in the horse world on how to manage that stress.
Yeah, and I know that I've had people, yourself, but also others in the programs that I do who are horse people, which I, of course, love because there's sort of a common bond amongst all of us who are horse people. But in my own meditation and yoga practice and with people in my programs, I think that there's a similarity in a way. I think that we have spent our lives as horse people connecting with that which is nonverbal, with that which is energetic. And so there is, in a way, a familiarity with it's similar to the practices of yoga. That said, all of us, like as you mentioned, live in a really kind of high stress modern culture. So most people I encounter in my programs do have nervous systems that are already elevated. And so that kind of being able to self-regulate, not just sitting quietly on the yoga mat, but out in the world, including with the animals, can be, I've heard from people that it's really powerful and really helpful.
Yes, yes. And it reminds me that, well, again, I always view everything with a horse in mind. So if the people are struggling with their sympathetic nervous system, their ups and downs, as you say, do they ever get stuck in like the sympathetic nervous system?
Yeah. Yeah, it's really common actually. And yoga is interesting in that it sort of described this several thousand years ago. So in a way, it's sort of interesting to know that we are working with the same things that people were working with several thousand years ago, although I'd argue that maybe a little bit more intensely now. But yeah, it's very common to get stuck there. And part of why we can get stuck there is not just because of the busyness of life or the stresses of modern culture, but yoga has put a lot of emphasis on how we interact with the mind, how we interact with our thoughts. And so maybe jumping ahead here a little bit, but learning how to use attention and how we pay attention, or maybe sometimes divert attention away from the sort of ever-present thought stream in the mind. It either can keep us sort of stuck in that sympathetic state, or it can really help us de-escalate once we realize that we have a choice to not follow every single thought train that might be moving through at any given moment. So amazing. I mean, the several thousand-year-old wisdom that tells us that, and yet it's still so relevant today.
Yes, yes, it is still relevant. And, often I get horses that come to me that are stuck in that sympathetic nervous system. And it's really interesting once you start to dive into seeing more about what the horses are saying.
Mm.
and getting them out of the sympathetic nervous system, it really they opens up their world, and the relationship that you can build from that is so stronger and more
Yeah.
more empathetic on both sides. So I think, again, the more that people can feel like they can get in and out of their nervous system according to what they need is better.
Yes. Yeah.
So
Such a good point, Vicky. I mean, there are times when it actually is adaptively helpful to be escalated. There are real situations that would require that. And so we're not trying to, completely blunt the system either. Those kind of flows are important, but having a toolkit, so to speak, when we know that we may be reaching sort of the threshold of our nervous system, having it is actually really helpful to know that you have tools and skills to self-regulate over time can actually help kind of you don't get quite so stressed because you feel confident in your abilities to self-regulate. And I suspect that you see that with the horses too, that as you help them build their own toolkit to relax, they can choose that option because then they know how to do it.
yes, no, I totally think that there is a very comfortable crossover between the horse and the human in that regards.
Yeah.
All right. So question number 2, what awakened you to your soul's purpose? Like, do you feel you're on it now, or are you still evolving?
Hopefully still evolving. That's the
Yes.
goal, right? Yeah, yeah, it's a great question. I mean, absolutely this work found me. I did not go out and find it. So I was moving through a particular and rather long period of years where I was experiencing really severe pain symptoms. I was riding professionally at the time and really had to stop riding altogether. It was as if the information that was coming to my body from the horses like no longer even made sense. It's like the pain was kind of scrambling, what I could even perceive and connect with in the horses. I also experienced infertility at the same time. The primary condition I have called endometriosis is not well managed, not well recognized. I was 18 years to be diagnosed. And so in that period of time, it sort of destroyed my reproductive system. I went into menopause, as you read in the bio, very naturally, very early, which brought with it some other health conditions too. So I was kind of kicking around the medical system, trying all sorts of different treatments, and nothing really helping. And I attribute literally to grace. I was directed by a doctor to a program at OHSU. It's a teaching hospital. I lived in Portland, Oregon at the time. And a couple there that are on the faculty there had developed this program called mindful yoga for chronic pain. And so, unfortunately, it was more like the doctor saying, we don't know what to do with you. So maybe try this mindful yoga program. And it ended up helping me way more than any of the sort of conventional treatments. In fact, it really started helping me pretty much right away, the first day that I went to that class. And there was a strong sense, not only was this something that I needed to continue to pursue, because I mean, let's face it, at the time, I just really wanted to feel better. Like that was my whole goal. So to continue with that, but also like an immediate sort of call that I wanted to share this with other people. I mean, my experience with chronic pain and chronic conditions is not particularly unique. It's actually a very widespread experience. And I was not alone in people who just felt like they had reached sort of the end of the line in what could help. And my thought was, this is something that has, doesn't have side effects the way that certain medications would, after a period of learning, it's something you can continue to do for yourself. You're not necessarily dependent on a practitioner or someone else. And why are people not, armed with this information prior to reaching such a difficult point? So that's been a really motivating sort of piece for me since day one. I honestly believe everyone should know this. Again, whether it's, a more severe health condition or just the stresses of daily life, there are tools and practices that can really help us struggle less. And so I would say overarchingly, that I do think is my soul's purpose, is where there is suffering, to point towards sustainable, accessible practices that can help, that can really, really help.
Yeah, because you were so dark and felt so unnoticed in the
Yes.
world of the medical field.
Yeah.
And you had to, fortunately, there was a doctor that steered you in the right direction.
Yeah.
And the holistic approach is more of what yoga, I would have to think, is. And finding the attunement back into your own body, like tuning into how is your body working and how is it being effective. And with stress and everything going on nowadays, the big word dis-ease, right? I mean, we don't know what trauma keeps locked into our body. We don't know, because it happens usually at a very young age that some of this stuff starts imprinting us.
Yeah.
Um, so being able to walk out of the dark cave and be able to see the light is so amazing and beautiful. And I
Yeah.
love that you're being able to share that concept, that idea that you don't need to stay dark. You can find the light. And everybody's light is different. And I think that that's a huge piece to remember. Not one of us are alike. We all have our own special, unique gifts that are given to us.
Yeah.
And now this one is one that you're giving out. So I love it. And I think it's just amazing. I'm so happy for you.
Thank you. Yeah. And I just want to highlight something you said too. I heard someone say something recently. It's everyone really is special. And we sometimes think special means better than, and it doesn't. What it means is unique and sort of magical in its own right. So, in fact, every single person is unique and special. And I think also what you said about pointing people back, turning back inside and befriending their own body, befriending themselves, we actually can be pretty hard on ourselves. And it's ultimately not super helpful. It really, wherever those sort of impulses come from, they don't really help us feel well. They don't help us be who we are hoping to be in the world.
Yeah, and that brings up a really good point because it's so easy to put ourselves down. It's so easy to say we're a failure, that we're not being productive enough because of the type of society that's out there, especially with social media now. I mean, everybody's, showing what this, they're not showing who they are. Let's just put it that way. So again, I think that finding space, a safe space for all of us to jump into is really a great thing. And you offering that is wonderful. And when I think about the horses, it's about the safe place for the horses as well. They're with us not all the time. We're only with them for a few hours, maybe each day. I mean, I'm fortunate. I get to live with my horses on my property, but most people get maybe an hour, 2 hours, a couple times a week with their horse. So they need to be able to find their safety, their space, their comfort. And I do find that that is lacking more and more as I kind of dive into that.
Yeah.
But one thing I do want to talk about is, and it is probably our next question. Yeah, here it is. How does the pelvic floor
Mm.
have to do with riding? And you haven't really talked about this new adventure that you're on, but do you feel there is a connection here with the horse's spine that can be more creation to become one or oneness?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking about that. It's, previously when I work with folks, I'm usually working with a fairly gentle movement practice. Again, most of the time we're trying to help people sort of release tension, relax, move mindfully. But this is even more specific. I'm partially introducing this pelvic floor work because I'm working with more people whose pain or condition is pelvic pain. But it's super relevant to horse people as well. So just to start with what the pelvic floor is something both men and women have. It is a system of muscles that sit really at the very base of the pelvis, kind of around, attached to the hips and hold our pelvic organs in them. So as horse people, our seat, we know, is really our primary connection with the horse, right? And so just the way that you have connection with the horse in your hands and arms from the bit, if you're riding, you also have these muscles in your pelvis that are in direct communication with the energies of the horse, sort of as they're moving up through the spine. So it is, in my mind, the really the most important point of at least physical contact between horse and rider. And these muscles, like any muscles in the body, can have get into certain patterns. So they can get into sort of chronically tight patterns. They can also get into chronically weak patterns. And they can actually be tight in one area and loose in the other. So I'm starting to work with movement practices with folks to, first of all, become aware that you have a pelvic floor, that you have these incredibly important muscles in your pelvis. Oftentimes, a lot of tension is held in the pelvis. So learning how to relax those muscles. The goal ultimately is that the muscles can do just like my bicep would. It can lengthen long, it can contract and strong, and we need to have that same dexterity in our pelvic floor. So in terms of connecting with the horse, I mean, it's hard to kind of overstate how important having a responsive pelvis and pelvic floor is. And
Yeah, and you're talking about the awareness of the pelvic, and we're riding along and all of a sudden our right hip is starting to get sore, or we're bouncing around and we're not being able to relax our pelvic as well. And this is all a communication to our horse.
yeah.
It's a two-way. But I also was popped in my head that a lot of horses don't use their spine as well as they should, and they don't have the pelvic strength that they need.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of trauma. I do a lot of trauma work on horses, and there's a lot of trauma that's stuck in the pelvic. How does that
Mhm.
work in your
Mhm.
new pelvic floor exercises? Have you seen more trauma show up in that area? A little bit different than maybe in the heart?
Yeah, it's part of well, to back up, oftentimes someone will land with me and doing this particular pelvic floor yoga because there is some sort of discomfort happening. So, discomfort can happen in the pelvis for a variety of reasons, certainly active childbirth, but also post childbirth, menopause, conditions like endometriosis. There's all sorts of sort of reasons that there can be discomfort in the pelvis, and emotional trauma is one of them. So when I do kind of a first session, an intake sort of session, as I'm sure you do kind of with the horses too, there's a whole kind of series of questions and sort of a conversation that's quite intimate that takes place in that process. And, sometimes someone might share sort of some intimate information. Other times, it might just be more that I see the ways that either traumas or stresses can sort of show up in those muscles. And I handle those conversations really sensitively because, especially as women, kind of historically, we've been taught to not even talk about this part of our body. We shouldn't show it. We shouldn't talk about it, that there's messaging that it's somehow shameful or something that should be hidden. And so I think we all have a little bit of trauma in our pelvis in that way, from being so either restricted or objectified. Like it's a very complicated part of the body, particularly for women. And the other thing is it's also the responsivity of the pelvis is very tied to the breath. I won't get into all the anatomy, although I'm quite passionate about it, but the breath is very connected to the pelvic floor. And so oftentimes where we start, actually not often, all the time where we start is with the breath. And that can be a really nice way to move into this work without going directly to the place where there may have been trauma, or at the very least where a lot of tension has been stored. But yeah, I mean, it's a powerful and sort of not well explored area of the body. And it's interesting to me that you sort of find that similarly with horses and the spine and their sacral and pelvic area too.
Yeah, and I also, isn't there a power station in our below our belly button that I'm sure that there's different names for them, but just think about female with power. That's a hard thing for women on some level. I mean, we do have a lot of power women out there, but we don't always get to voice our opinion. We've been taught to sit and be quiet. So I would think that unraveling the pelvic floor would actually give you more power, not power in an ego way or that I need to be abusive, but just to be able to stand taller and stronger into who you are. Is that something you think is a benefit from something working with you on this?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the yogic system refers to some of these things in the system of chakras, which is not something I really talk about a whole lot with clients. But for example, the first and second chakra are located in the pelvis, in the pelvic area of the body.
It's
And
called the root. Do you guys
the
call it the
root, yeah, the root chakra is kind of the very base of the spine in the pelvis, and that is sort of connected with safety, security, power, groundedness. We think of our legs as sort of how we root down, but the power is actually kind of at the base of the pelvis, at the base of the spine. At least that's kind of how it's seen in the yogic system. But I love the question, and what I think I wanted to say earlier, and I think really fits here, is the yogic system beautifully recognizes that the mind, the body, and the heart are completely inseparable. We have somehow gotten this notion that they are somehow separate, that they're not connected, and that we might bring them back together. And the reality is that they've never been apart. And that what we feel emotionally, we feel in our bodies. What we think actually affects our bodies. It's woven together like a tapestry. And so the pelvis, I think, is the seat of much of this union or connection. This yoga actually meaning union is the definition of that word. And of course, that oneness or union, you could think about that on many different levels, but a lot of us start here with what it means is union between mind, body, and heart. And I absolutely see that as relevant to connecting with the pelvis. How can that all be united if we're disconnected from a particular part of our body? Yeah.
Yeah, and that brings up another great point because I'm thinking, as horse riders, we're looking for the horse to have the power in the pelvic, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so if we're constantly riding out of oneness, not being able to be in oneness, we're relying on our hands now. We're relying on other places of our body to get balanced and become safe. The first place we go to is our hands. And then we start riding the horse behind the bit. We start crunching that spine down. We start undeveloping the pelvic because there's nowhere for it to go. And then we have to bring the draw reins and the bigger bits and the more, types of training that are actually, in my opinion, abusive. But the horse can't even express themselves anymore. And I feel that that happens with people as well. We start to not be able to express. We start to go down that road of darkness, just being mundane with everything on a day-to-day basis. So we don't get to see that light and bright and fun stuff. So I really think that bringing the pelvic floor into anybody's practice would be a fantastic thing. I know that I'm going to be doing it.
It really, it is. I think it's beneficial for everyone. And, a lot of times, again, the primary goal when someone might be working with me would be to reduce pain or to sort of increase relaxation and ease tension. But ultimately, what I see and hear a lot is an increased connection, increased vitality. And that's not necessarily what brought someone to. Very much the same with me. That's not what brought me to it. I just wanted to feel better. I wanted to be out of excruciating pain. But ultimately, what it was much more of a union with myself, recognizing that connection, and feeling more vital and alive and connected in the world. And I love that you brought up sort of all of that kind of going to the hands with the rider and everything we've kind of learned over the last 10 to 20 years about roller and sort of forcing the horse into a frame while the hind end is sort of just trailing off.
God only knows where.
Where is it? We don't know. And the horse is certainly no longer connected to it either because they're trying to escape this sort of prison in the mouth. And so, yeah, I think you and I are just beginning to explore maybe how we can bring these two things together, with both the rider's pelvis, the horse's pelvis. And again, that what I think is a sacred meeting point between the rider's pelvis and the horse's back. I really believe it's a sacred connection.
Well, if we're riding from relaxation and lightness, as described in the dressage. Now, I'm a hunter jumper background, so the forward seat is more of what I was taught. But the more that I start to get involved in the horses and how they're coming to me, I'm like, we need to do better. We need to see how is it that they can express and be a part of showing us who they are and bringing the beauty in their energetic steps, not through forced and being able to whip them or spur them into, okay, this is how we're going to do it. But that they really enjoy having to express that lightness and they do want to move their body better. And I cannot imagine how when a rider is sitting on a horse that has that availability in themselves can transmit that to the horse. I mean, the horses are a mirror to us. So if we're locked up in the pelvic or we're locked up in the shoulders or we're disconnected, the horse is going to try to match us because they want us to feel like they're in the herd. They want us, they're always about not being overshadowed. That's how they stay safe. So we're overshadowing them with who we are. And what really shows up underneath the saddle is really truly who we are, not necessarily who they want to be. So I feel like this is a huge step forward in the right direction in creating oneness with your horse and being able to up your riding and up your life. I mean,
Absolutely.
right?
I mean, where else are we as humans recreating these patterns? We're also bringing that pattern to our relationships. We're bringing it into our politics. I mean, we're sort of recreating that pattern in many places. And so what a liberating thing to first sort of recognize and feel that in yourself. And again, for people who are horse people, I mean, what we want is a partner. We don't want a slave, right? Like we don't want a slave that has to do what we say under duress. That's actually not a relationship. And that's the relationship. Ultimately, I'm in sort of the business of helping people build a relationship with themselves. And we want that same sort of open, compassionate relationship with ourselves too. It's actually, I believe, Vicky, the way forward for humanity. Like I really believe that either we start to make this a priority or we are not as a species really headed in a great direction. And I guess I would say that's sort of an underlying force in the work I do too, that at this point, I think peace of any kind has to start like right here with ourselves. And then we can be the agents of how we would like to see that out in our families and other relationships and work and other things. Like it kind of has to start here.
Yes, yes, no, I agree. And you know, I think about the horses' relationship with us and how they've evolved through everything. And I listened to a podcast with Warwick Schiller, and he had Tom Mays on. And I don't know if anybody knows his integrative type of body work, but he said that the horses are saying, and I believe this 100%, that we're not here to heal them. They're here to heal us. And when you think about that, and the whole idea of them mirroring us is they're showing us what our core personality, what our core strengths, what our core weaknesses are. And so with that and being able to create this oneness with the pelvic floor, with relationships, with a better self can only upgrade your riding and your experiences, yes, with your horse and in life. And I am too a little bit on the bigger picture. It's really the world that we're living in right now is ready for a change and a shift. And I know, especially in the horse show world, um, but nobody really knows how to do it, or at least they are talking about it, which is fantastic. But we need to get some real direction on how this can happen. And I think the better we can train our horses makes us better people. And if we're
That's,
better people, we're going to be better for the world. And it's just a drop in the little puddle, but that puddle will grow and it will become like a wildfire, in my opinion, if we all just agree that being a better person is where we need to start.
yeah, yeah. I have a little magnet on my fridge that says, let me be the person today that my dog thinks I am. But, it's kind of a nice reminder, I mean, it's the dogs are a similar, a lot of us with horses also have dogs, and it's a similar mirroring type of
Yes.
thing. And I think that, yeah, it's such a huge, huge opportunity. And, I want to kind of go back. I know you might have some other questions, but where we started, and I sort of jumped ahead to talking about kind of what you said, what might keep us trapped sort of in fight or flight, and talked about, I mean, yoga and meditation has profound implications for how we work with the mind. And, the body is a wonderful way in, but I think ultimately, we as humans have a lot to work on in terms of how we work with our minds. And there's a huge opportunity there. One of the things I teach, people in my programs is that the way we use our attention actually determines the quality of our lives. What we pay attention to
Yes.
shapes and blossoms out what our lives actually consist of. And again, for thousands of years now, yoga and meditation have said it's important to observe and witness and see what's happening in the mind, and to recognize that you have agency, you have choice over where you place your attention. And I just can't think that any of these arenas where we really feel like we need to sort of upgrade how we are working with ourselves and others, it's an integral and imperative skill to be able to sort of sit back, observe the mind, and really start to understand the way that we're working with thought. Is it helping? Is it hurting? I feel as deeply about sort of releasing and creating connection in the body as I do about how important it is to start to become intentional about what we pay attention to. Yeah.
Yes, and it's interesting. I'll be working with a client or a horse, and there's a lot of distractions,
Mhm.
right? And so I often wonder, I used to wonder, I know now that the person's mind is distracted. And
Yes.
so the horse is distracted. And so getting control over your thoughts is a huge piece on how to keep yourself centered and moving into the goals that you have ahead of you. So I love that.
Yeah, there's absolutely much more information available to us in any given situation than we are aware of. And most of the time, because we are following sort of predictable, habitual patterns of thought. And the freedom that opens up when we start to see actually the possibility of each moment or all the information that's possible in each moment, that's where connection can actually arise.
Yes, yes. Well, how do you work with your clients, and what does this work, if anybody wants to work with you, look like? And do you have any a particular case or a
Mm.
particular, this person came from this point to that point that you can share with us?
Yeah, well, the way that I typically work with people is either individually or in groups. I'm starting to focus a little bit more on individuals, only because finding times where groups can all meet together is becoming increasingly challenging. Um, and I typically work with people over an 8 to 12 week period. And part of the reason behind that is that it takes time to build new habits, right? And one of my goals is that when someone finishes working with me, that they will have actually put in place the steps that they can continue this work on their own. So an extended sort of much the way you would with a horse. If someone brought you a horse and wanted in one ride for you to, sort of fix something, it's not likely. It takes time for these things. So that's sort of how I do it. There's more information on my website, Molly Knott Mindfulness. Like I said, I work primarily with people that are having some sort of chronic health issue or chronic pain, chronic stress or anxiety. But I also get quite a few people that are just kind of working with the difficulty of being human, right? Which there's many difficulties to being human. Let's see, a particular case. It's hard to think of just one. I mean, I'm in a fortunate position now where I will get periodic, just kind of check-ins from people who have worked with me. And I think it really is along the lines of what I said a few minutes ago, that they started down this road because they had XYZ condition. And what it has led to is a complete revolution, sort of in how they relate to themselves, how they relate to others, how they move through the world. And that's sort of the holy grail for me. And
Mm.
that's also something that is historic and traditional to yoga and meditation, that we might first arrive because we have a particular individual need that we're trying to meet with practice, but that really the goal, again, is oneness. And so, as inner transformation starts to happen, outer transformation is sort of the next logical step. So it's really fascinating, and I feel really honored. I know you feel so honored to work with the horses in the way you do, and I feel that same way working with people, especially, when someone brings kind of their whole self to this work, and it takes courage to kind of turn inside. It takes courage to say, I'm actually going to turn my attention around and see what's going on here. And I'm just like always so honored that I get to do that alongside people.
Do you feel like there's an awakening that happens? I mean, I feel like most of us, like I said, have our gifts when we come. I think our soul purpose, we've already been, hey, these are what you get. And again, it's just my feeling. I don't know if there's any research on it or not, but um, that we are, that which what makes us unique. But don't you feel that we get blinded by it. Like we get distracted, we get off course, and then we have to figure out how to come back. So being awakened in some of these areas would help us to come back on track. And then
Yeah.
maybe what myths do we have out there about yoga? Can you share any of
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, probably the most difficult myth about yoga that confronts sort of me in my work is that people hear that word and they think exercise, and there certainly are benefits to the movement portion of yoga. It is actually sort of traditionally seen as the least important part. So in some of the really well-known traditional texts of yoga, there's like one line about movement. And all the rest of it is about awakening and transformation and recognizing oneness. And so the biggest myth is that yoga is exercise. And, it absolutely is not. It
Oh,
is, it is aimed at transformation. Other myths, we
well,
talked
that's a
about
pretty big
this.
one.
That's a big one. I mean, it's the hardest thing for me. If I say to someone, I work on yoga for chronic pain, a lot of people who live in chronic pain have reduced their movement quite a bit. And there can be some fear around like, well, they picture the type of yoga that you see on Instagram that's, very flexible. And they think, well, that's not for me. And it just couldn't be further from the truth. I've been trained by my mentors who created the program I work with, and they say all that's needed for yoga is breath and attention, and that is all you need to practice yoga. I think that's really big, and then the other thing, just kind of dialing in again to the work with the pelvic floor. I think we talked a lot about how that can be really transformative work. I think there's a sense out there that, pelvic pain is really like menstrual pain, and it's just so much more than that. There's numerous conditions that can kind of create pain or tension in the pelvis, but also, as we started to talk about, it's a place that just holds so much emotion, has the potential to hold so much power. And so, I guess it's not even a myth. It's just, again, how disconnected, particularly as women, we are from this part of our body. We can't really move towards wholeness or oneness until we reclaim that part of our body. So, not so much a myth, but I think just a blind spot that unfortunately we have in our culture. And so, I would just encourage anyone that is curious, how could this help my writing? Or maybe they have a pelvic pain issue that they haven't spoken about because it can feel taboo to do so, to know that, this is it's potent, powerful work that's available to everyone and can really be really transformative.
Oh, I love how you shared all that. Hey, is there a tip or something that we can get from you today to help us move in this journey?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about that actually. I think that the tip I want to offer everyone has again to do with how we use our attention, because I feel like this is sort of the secret to life that's hiding in plain sight. And that is that you have choice over where you place your attention. And certainly the practice of meditation, that is like what it's geared towards, is to train ourselves in how we refine, how we use our attention. But just to notice, maybe begin to notice when my attention is on XYZ, how do I feel? When my attention is on this, how do I feel? I think a lot of us struggle with social media and the role that it has in our lives. And I notice when I place my attention on something that is in like 2 seconds at a time and is all over the place and is coming from all sorts of different perspectives and directions, I start to feel really unsettled. And so I think my number one tip would be to start to notice, like, how do you feel when you're engaged in sort of different points of focus? And that's sort of the first step to recognizing how powerful it can be to have the choice to entertain or allow a certain thought to move on, or even how we spend our time. But attention is the secret uh, to ease and well-being rather than the dis-ease. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Focus is an amazing gift that we have when we use it. One of the things that I do first thing in the morning is and I would say meditation loosely. I don't really always do a yoga meditation or a particular, but I do take 15 minutes to find me for the day.
Yeah.
And I think that's been really instrumental after taking your yoga class, the importance of finding who is and how do I want to prepare my day? Do I
Yeah.
want to prepare my day racing out of bed, going, I'm late, da, da, da. Or do I want to take an extra 15 minutes and just go, okay, what am I grateful for? What am I happy that is existing in my life? And where is it that I want this day to go? Like I try to plan that stuff out. So
Yeah.
that's something that I do. Is there some little tip that you personally do?
Yeah, I mean, I love that, Vicky. And I do something similar. I mean, so another myth, right? Another myth is that meditation is sitting in some particular position with your hands in some position. And like that's also a myth, you know. Anytime you are connecting intentionally within, that is meditation. And I place a really heavy emphasis not just on setting aside time for sort of formal meditation, which is important to me and to do each day, but to kind of try to keep that connection throughout the day, to allow meditation to be something that's not just, again, on the mat, but something I take out with me into my everyday interactions, whatever that may be. And my practice lately, since around kind of before the holidays, is to, as I move through my day, can I look for and see that divine or the spark of life in everything that I interact with. In fact, not just animate things, but really in the manifestation of the world and the life, there is what yoga teaches is there is an underlying force, there is an underlying presence or being or awareness, whatever consciousness, whatever word we want to use, that is emanating as the world around us. And it's about use of attention. I can see the content of the conversation, or I can see the spark of divine life that is in my dogs and in the trees and in this Zoom meeting, right now with a beloved friend. And that's become a big part of my practice is looking for that. So yeah, it can take so many different forms, but the idea is connecting kind of with what's hiding in plain sight, which is the spark of life, the spark of divinity, if that's the word that feels resonant.
That feels yeah, and that really opens up in my mind that connection with horses and how to build that relationship. And one of the things that I think is misused with horses is just go out in their paddock and watch them.
Yeah,
Take on the beauty because they have a frequency that they all are working from. I kind of call it the universal language, but it's the divine. It's the same. I mean, we can all have a different name for it,
words. Yeah,
but it's there 24/7. All we got to do is plug in, and the horses are already plugged into it. So if we stand around and don't expect, and we don't basically say, this is what we're going to go do, but you truly sit and watch your horse and learn how he communicates back to you. It is one of the most favorite, most beautiful experiences I have ever had in my life, I will have to say. And I do it often, and it's never old.
yeah, it truly is never old because each moment is fresh. I did that quite a bit. And my horse Fitch lives with you and now, but I bought him when he was 2 and I had him in Oregon where I lived at the time. And I did a ton of that where I put him, in a boarding situation where he was outside full time and wasn't a whole lot to do at that point. So I would just go and hang out with him in the pasture. And It's incredible. Like it's totally incredible. I actually want to share a quick story. I know we're probably hitting the amount of
Yep,
time.
yep.
But this is a story from the yogic tradition, and I think it really speaks to what we're talking about here. So this is, ages ago in history, and there's a man, he's going towards a border crossing, and he needs to cross to another part of the region. And he's got these three donkeys, and the donkeys are all loaded up, carrying so much stuff, right? And the border people say, oh, he looks like a smuggler. He must be trying to smuggle something in. And so he's got all these things on the donkeys filled with straw. And so they stop him and they start going through and they're rifling through all the straw, and they can't find anything. And they go, we know this guy's a smuggler. Like, and so finally they have to say, okay, well, I guess we have to let him go. He's not smuggling anything. Well, he was smuggling something. He was smuggling donkeys, right? And this story is used in the yogic tradition to describe what we're talking about, that there is this aspect of life that is hidden in plain sight, that is absolutely within everything. And yet we miss it because we're rifling through the straw. And I'll leave you with one final quote. This is by Rumi. Some people watching this might be familiar with poetry of Rumi. Rumi has this quote that says, do not be the rider that gallops all night and never sees the horse beneath him. And so
Mhm.
it's very relevant to us as horse people, but he's also in that he's pointing to that divine life, that universal life that is within all. And that here we can be riding along, and that's what's carrying us, that's what's moving, and we just don't see it.
Oh, gosh, I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And just my last question, and I didn't even let you know about this one, but do you
Uh-oh.
have a favorite book that someone could jump onto and go, oh, yes, this would help in maybe some type of journey?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I have different books that I would recommend for different things. There's a really beautiful book that I'll just to pick one that came to me when I was in that really, really dark place. And it's just called Self-Compassion. Um,
Oh,
it's a book by a woman named Kristen Neff. She's kind of the pioneering university researcher on compassion and specifically self-compassion. And that book was really like a really pivotal part of my healing journey, was to really start to understand the transformative power of compassion towards ourselves. So I would say that. And then there's a book called Buddha's Brain, and Buddha's Brain was written by Dr. Rick Hanson. And if folks are interested in sort of understanding meditation better and including sort of like how it actually works in these human bodies, it's a really beautiful exploration of that. I think those are two nice starting points.
beautiful,
What
beautiful.
about
Thank
horse
you.
books? Do you have a horse book that you think is a good starting point?
It's really funny because I don't really read horse books. I kind of in the like my absolute favorite one that I have read in this last year was, and I can't remember the author. I'm going to have to look it up on my Audible, but Radical Wholeness. That is a powerful, powerful, and it brings on the connection that we have within the universe. Like none of us can live without each other. The plants, the water, the air, the everything. And to me, that's what it's all about. It's not about us being so empowered in ourselves. Yes, we need to have power within us, but we also have to be able to know that just me being on this earth is helping someone else. And then I'm helping the trees. And it just goes on and on. You should be able to just put radical wellness in, but let me see if I can grab it real quick. Oh, you know what? This is an amazing book. I just finished it. Flying Lead Change.
Oh,
And it's by Kelly Wendorf,
okay.
Wendorf.
Okay.
That is a whole life rock changing idea about horses. And yeah, I was so amazed. I'm still rereading it. It's so in depth and it's so deep that I go, okay. Radical Wholeness by Philip Stefford and Jeff, somebody else, Jeff, somebody. But anyway, you'll get it.
Yeah, yeah, and flying lead changes, that's the other one.
Oh, yes. In fact, we were driving to Tucson to see my grandson, and my husband had to listen to it twice.
Yeah,
So
love
it
that.
was, I loved it. So those are mine.
Yeah,
Thank you,
thank you.
Molly, for
Yeah.
taking the time to do this. And I will be sharing this on my I just put up a new channel for Horse Lover Health Coach. And we are going to do a few more of these talking about riding and how can we help develop oneness through different areas. And so I don't know if Molly has a YouTube channel, but if she does, maybe she can share
Yeah.
that. And we will be posting it either the next day or two for you guys to listen to. And I hope you enjoyed as much as we have been able to do this, because Molly and I, we could go on forever.
Yeah, it's really a pleasure and an honor always, Vicky, to explore these different themes. And I so value all that you bring to it with your perspective with the horses. And I think you're doing really amazing work. So thank you. And I'll be listening to the other installments of this series too.
Yes. All right, everybody.
All
Happy
right.
trails. Cheers.
Bye.